When Steven Spielberg started to make the movie, he sought cooperation from two places, the Air Force and NASA.
On one level, it just contextualizes what we're talking about. Obviously, if somebody did come to him, they came in a more covert way. This is the overt part of this story. First off, NASA. In 1978, he was talking in an interview, Spielberg himself, and he said that NASA wrote him a 20-page letter asking him not to make the film. He had wanted cooperation, but they, as he put it, they read the script and got very angry and felt it was a film that would be dangerous. I'm Bryce Zabel. Have you ever wondered if there's a secret connection between Hollywood and UFOs?
I'm Brent Friedman, and you are listening to Sound, Light, and Frequency.
Today we're going to have a close encounter of the Spielberg kind.
So grab your gas mask. We are going to Devil's Tower. So, on our last episode, we told you about the deal we were offered by JC from the Office of Naval Intelligence, the deal to make Dark Skies part of their slow drip disclosure program.
And we also told you about that strange formula that JC gave us, the one that he wrote on the back of a bank envelope.
Okay, so that deal and the formula are two subplots in our story. And we're going to be coming back to them many times throughout the series.
And these are super important to the overall story we're telling, and we're certainly not trying to be cute by not jumping into them immediately. It's just that we want to do two things. We want to provide context for them, and we also want to take you inside the story. And that way you can experience this brush with the phenomenon and even the cover-up as close to the way we did as possible. And hopefully, together, we might just find some answers.
So today, we're going to shift focus away from our personal story and pull back to Hollywood at large.
We're starting with Close Encounters of the Third Kind. What we want to do is sort of set the stage for what's to come and to sort of let this flow. And in order to do that, it sure seems like a good move to start with the actual granddaddy, the best UFO movie probably ever made and maybe forever. And that's Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Steven Spielberg.
That's right. And it's a movie that I think most people would generally say is the seminal film that depicts UFOs and aliens. It got tons of critical acclaim, made lots of money. What do we think the log line is for this?
Well, it's pretty simple, actually. And folks, you know what a log line is. That's how we're supposed to explain everything we do in Hollywood in a single sentence. And that's kind of a great exercise sometimes because it allows you to sort of say, what is my movie or what is my TV series really about? The log line that we're positing, I don't know what they pitched. This is just what we've got here to look at. When ordinary people around the world experience strange visions and encounters with UFOs, one man's obsession drives him to uncover the truth, culminating in humanity's first face-to-face meeting with extraterrestrials. Which, it almost takes the drama out of it to put it into that. Because, let's face it, the reason people remember this is that Richard Dreyfuss, who plays the character Roy Neary, sees a UFO, has his life turned upside down, and it's all about his journey. And it's all about mankind first having this major encounter out in Wyoming at the end of the film.
I think if you ask what people remember most, they remember dun, 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 dun.
I'm so glad, by the way, Brent, that you could actually do that because I can't carry a tune. I couldn't do that. I'm glad you did it. It's the most incredible 5 notes in probably the history of music. And as I understand it, when they were trying to come up with something, because they wanted to talk about the nature of communication and that it's not always language or the language could be music. And apparently Spielberg and Williams came to the conclusion that 6 notes was too many, 7 notes was definitely too many, and 4 notes wasn't enough, but 5 was just right, which makes you sound like, okay, great, there can't be that many options. But I think when they ran it through a mathematician, he came back and said, if you've got 5 notes, you've got something like 360,000 options or something. But you know what, Brent? They came up with the right one because it sticks in my head to this day.
Absolutely. It's haunting. And just to connect back to our podcast, if you think about it, the communication, the primary form of communication is sound, light, and frequency, right? You've got the sound, you've got the tones, you've got the lights at the end, right? And then you have the frequency, which is actually shattering glass, right? In that final scene up on Devil's Tower. So I think it's interesting that even though that was not part of they don't say that in the movie, that is actually something that comes right back to our basic thesis that sound, light, and frequency may be the secrets of the universe.
Might just be. And one of the things that I found interesting in getting ready to do this was just how Spielberg thought Close Encounters of the Third Kind was a great title for the thing. And he got that from J. Allen Hynek, who, of course, is the first person who ever defined it and was working on Close Encounters as a consultant. And just for the sake of people who are like, what's that all about? Just a reminder, you're not the only people that might wonder that. The marketing people, when they were getting ready to put out this film, they were concerned. This made me laugh because I was listening to an interview that I think Spielberg said, and some of the people in the marketing department thought it sounded like it had something to do with porn. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And so they went in their marketing very clearly over and over. They had everybody explaining what it was. Close Encounters of the First Kind is a close range sighting.
Okay.
Close Encounters of the Second Kind are physical effects. So whether it's radiation burns or maybe landing depressions on the ground, but a close encounter of the third kind is a UFO sighting where there is direct visual contact with an occupant, whether you want to call them non-human intelligence or aliens or visitors or others. You're seeing somebody who ain't from around the neighborhood.
Well, now, interestingly, they could have avoided all of these marketing headaches if they'd just gone with the original title, which was Watch the Skies.
Which is a great title. I say that often in emails, Watch the Skies. It's a little bit of a painful thing for me because about 20 years ago, somebody passed away and they had collected all of the great screenplays. And my wife and I inherited them all. And that included, I believe, a first draft of Watch the Skies, first production draft.
Did it say that on the title?
Yes.
Watch the Sky. Okay.
Yes, it said Watch the Skies on the title page. And it was clearly real. I mean, this guy had all the originals. And at the time, we were in what you would call cleaning mode. And my wife was saying, why do I have scripts all over the house here? We've got to do something with them. And so we donated them to the Writers Guild of America. So that means anyone listening to this, if you're a member or you can go to their library, you could read that same copy that we donated. And my only regret, of course, is it would probably be worth millions on an eBay account right now. But you know what? You got to help the world. Got to help the world.
Well, so getting back to the movie, from a personal standpoint, I had a very interesting experience. The movie came out in 1977. It came out after Star Wars, but
the same year as Star Wars.
The same year as Star Wars, right. But I think later that year. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in the Bay Area. I was not old enough at that time to get in a car and go see the movie. I don't even know that I was aware of the movie, to be honest, except a friend of mine's father had apparently had some sort of UFO experience, was all fired up to see it, put a bunch of kids in the car, me included, and we went out on opening night. Now, apparently Close Encounters opened only in 2 theaters initially, LA and New York, for a week or two, and then once everyone was convinced it was a hit, it went wide. So I think the second week or whatever, when it opened in San Francisco, I saw it on opening night and it blew my mind. I had never seen anything like that before. And some of those images are still haunt me. I probably have seen the movie 30 times.
I've seen it a lot. I don't think I've seen it 30. And by the way, I'm just curious, what was the audience reaction? Were they reacting with you at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, the audience reaction, there were gasps. I think basically Spielberg wanted to, he's said in quotes, that he wanted to capture that childlike wonder of experiencing something that kids don't question, right? And he cast the movie that way. A lot of the actors he felt had that childlike quality. And I think that came out in the screenings where the audience were just swept up in this experience and they weren't questioning whether any of this was possible. they were questioning when was it going to happen to them. That was my takeaway. And that was, I remember on the ride home, everyone was talking about how cool it would be to go inside the ship.
Although you didn't get to go inside the ship when it was released in 1977. Just to be clear, there have been 3 versions of Close Encounters of the Third Kind released. The first was that feature that you saw in 1977, and then there was a special edition in 1980 when Spielberg made what he called a deal with the devil. He agreed to take more money to shoot some scenes that were more ufological in nature, and he wanted to put those in the film. And in exchange, the studio said, yeah, but you got to take him on board the ship. So he shot the scene that took everybody on board the ship with Roy Neary. And then in 1998, he finally got to put the director's cut out, and it doesn't have that. He really felt like the audience should make up their own mind about what was inside the ship, so that's out of there now. Just to go back to, I didn't sit in San Francisco with the big cool crowd. I was a young TV newsman in Eugene, Oregon, and I had a cameraman who was very into this, and I was kind of into it too. We'd drive around all day looking for stories, and we were very expectant about this thing because a couple of years earlier, as a young FM news guy, I had covered the Travis Walton case. So I was like, okay, I know a little bit about UFOs. I wonder if this is going to have, since it was the third kind occupants, if it would be an abduction film in some respect. I thought maybe it would be. And even though Roy Neary, the main character, isn't abducted per se, the young little boy who's in the film is abducted. Right. So it's both. It's an abduction film and it's a wondrous film. And the only thing I thought when you're talking about wonder, Spielberg did go a little too far for some people in that opening film. In the final credits, they play the song "When You Wish Upon a Star," and it's a little saccharine for a UFO film, but people seem to forgive it. But I don't think it's in the director's cut.
No, I believe it was taken out.
Yeah.
I think it got some negative reactions.
Right.
Well, the interesting thing is, just to give some cultural context here, if you think about it, what Jaws did for monster movies, Close Encounters did for alien movies, which is it legitimized those genres, right? These were no longer B and C Hollywood movies. These were huge commercial box office successes and critically acclaimed movies. And so I think it changed a lot. But as you said, even in the special edition, he depicted the inside of a ship. And while most people at that time probably felt this felt real, this felt like what the UFO experience is all about, I think if you compare what he showed as the inside of the ship with what abductees over the years have described, he did not get that right.
No.
He did not get that right. Now, interestingly, I think people can say he did get a lot right? And by the way, that's what JC said to us when he came to make a deal. That was what drew him, apparently, and the Office of Naval Intelligence to Dark Skies. But let's go back and look now at a list of some of the things that we believe that he did get right, that Spielberg got right, and put on film, in some cases, the first that anyone ever seen with regards to ufology.
There certainly were a lot of firsts in it. In one respect, it sort of begins with what you might call a UFO flap, where everybody knows there's going to be UFOs out tonight, so let's go out and, there's people in their trucks and their armchairs and sitting outside watching them. And on the night that that's happening, this main character, Roy Neary, who played by Dreyfuss again, and is an electrician, the power's out. So again, there's a ufological thing that somehow they influence the power through some kind of electromagnetic pulse event or whatever.
Yep.
And he's out doing his repairs, and that is a creepy but very cool and incredibly iconic scene. There he is in his truck. He sees a light sort of behind his truck, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose.
Right.
The truck's shaking and everything's going on.
Now, technically, was that a close encounter of the second kind that he has there?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're escalating.
Yes, I like it.
In fact, you go from a first kind where they've been seen, and then you go to, well, actually, now I question that. He has his encounter first, and then we see the UFOs the next night.
But we start with them finding lost planes from,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
Well,
and talking about people who saw things. So I think we can say that was the first kind, right?
I have to, I got to go back to the lost planes. For me, listen, this is just personal opinion. I was a lot less impressed by the family stuff. It always irritated me a little bit because this Roy Neary character has a family that, it's kind of dysfunctional. And every time I was watching that, I was like, come on, let's get to the good stuff. Come on. And so you really get the good stuff at the beginning of the film where they are finding in the middle of a sandstorm in the desert all these planes from the World War II era. Frankly, I think it's from Flight 19 that was lost over the Bermuda Triangle, allegedly.
Right.
And there they are. They're in the desert. And not only the plane's untouched, but our guys are discovering it, and it's very secret, and it's a wonderful scene.
And the planes are intact. Remember, they turn them on, right?
Yeah.
And
they've got the same fuel in them and everything. It's really great.
And so, but I just realized what the other first kind experience is we go inside the air traffic controller tower.
Yes.
That is one of the most authentic UFO scenes I have ever seen. It feels like it's a transcript of something that actually must have happened.
It is brilliant. It's just, it's people talking to a jet pilot who is experiencing some kind of sighting. He's trying to call it in to them, and they all know something crazy is happening. And so you see more of these air traffic controllers coming together, and the main guy is saying, do you want to report?
Do you want to make a report?
Do you want to make a report? And everybody knows, but they haven't said the word yet. And then the next time, do you want to report a UFO?
Right.
And of course, that really touches on the major thing about UFOs, which is there's been a stigma all these years.
Absolutely.
Not only do pilots not want to report these things, but the average person that sees something is very concerned about talking about it because their family will say to them, please don't talk about that anymore. It's,
right.
My friends think you're weird, Dad, that kind of thing. So there's been a lot of stigma. There's certainly been stigma for pilots, many of which were grounded historically for daring to report. So ultimately, that pilot does not report. It ties in with something that's very big in the UFO world right now. Ryan Graves, who is the lieutenant in the U.S. Navy and an FA-18F fighter pilot who spent 10 years doing this. He was the guy on the 2015 USS Roosevelt incident who reported spheres inside of cubes. Yeah. That's kind of a weird thing to be out flying around, and he and his fellow pilots reported those things. That's a far cry from reporting a flying saucer, you know, something like that. But he has started the Americans for Safe Aerospace. He's testified before Congress about this. So in many respects, if there's any progress being made at all in this topic, one of them is at least among the first responders, if you will, in the air, the pilots, there is less stigma. They are more and more being encouraged to tell people what they see.
Well, and so, but that's a perfect example of what one of the things Spielberg got right. He captured that era in terms of the stigma, right? As you said, not just to pilots, but to the general public. But going back to the thing that Ryan Graves saw, which was the sphere inside the square, the sphere, the energy being, the orb, if you will, that was the first time I believe they had ever been shown on film in Close Encounters, right? You see the big crafts, the ice cream cones, I think as they're called, and the coming around the mountain sequence, but then trailing them as almost like they're the managers or the scouts or something are these little energy balls, these little balls of light. And I don't think that had ever been discussed before in public. It certainly had never been seen on film. I think it all goes back to the Foo Fighters, right? In World War II. So where that came from, don't know, but that's also something that everyone is talking about today.
Everybody's talking about orbs.
The orbs.
And not just orbs flying around. I mean, Lou Elizondo, who, of course, is almost synonymous with UFO disclosure efforts because he was part of that 2017 disclosure and helped get those 3 first videos from the Navy out before everybody, when the New York Times reported on it. Lou Elizondo wrote a book that came out last year called Imminent.
Great book.
And it's a very powerful book, and it's really his insider account of working in the Pentagon, trying to get the truth out. And when he couldn't get the truth out, he quit so that he could talk from the outside. In this book, there's a chapter where he talks about these orbs are inside his house. And not only is he seeing them, his wife is seeing them, his kids have seen them, they're outside the house, neighbors see them, which raises all kinds of questions that won't be gotten into in this episode, but it's sort of the hitchhiker effect.
Right.
Do these orbs attach themselves to people or things or places?
Well, but going back to Close Encounters, now ask the question, these had really never been discussed in public. They were referenced in World War II lore around about the Foo Fighters, but they were brought into the lexicon for the public in Close Encounters as these light orbs. Now we know either Steven Spielberg was prescient in terms of picking something that would become such a defining element of modern ufology today, but he was also being advised by two very interesting people on this movie, J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée, who you actually have a personal experience with.
I do. This year, I got to have lunch at Jacques Vallée's apartment, of all things. And
I'm so envious.
It was such a cool thing. I mean, to think, well, first of all, his lovely wife made lunch for us. I mean, that was pretty cool. But apropos of Close Encounters, because it's hard not to talk to him about it, what everyone needs to understand is there is a character in Close Encounters, the French scientist Lacombe. And Lacombe is played by the great French director Francois Truffaut.
Played very well, by the way.
Played incredibly well. He grounds it. I think that's Spielberg's, crowning accomplishment in casting.
Yeah.
He had to screw up his courage to ask him, and he said yes. And he came and said, I don't need to be a director here. I'm an actor. And he acted the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Did a great job. But that character was certainly inspired by Jacques Vallée. So people have asked Jacques about this all the time. So, I'm not going to go to his house and not ask him. So I did say, what's your take on being portrayed in film? And I bet that was kind of cool. And of course, he's got that smile. And of course, it was cool. He loved it. Yeah. But the thing that he said and has said consistently is the ending is a little too positive for him based on the evidence that he has seen in his ongoing investigations. He's not saying that it's completely wrong. He's just saying there's a darker side to what he has seen in the people and the witnesses he's talked to. And I thought that was kind of interesting. It also mirrors something that the great UFO researcher Stanton Friedman said. Stanton also felt that. It's hard not to see Close Encounters of the Third Kind and say, what a great freaking movie this is. It's not a documentary. Mm-hmm. It's a movie.
Right.
And so Stanton felt very much like Jacques Vallée, which is, it's great ending, it's fun, but there's another side to all this.
Well, speaking of another side to all of this, and going back to this concept of firsts, I think this is the other aspect of Close Encounters we want to talk about outside the movie, everything surrounding the movie. So in the topic of firsts, I want to bring up a friend and a colleague who you, of course, know because we both worked with them as the director on our Dark Skies pilot, our 2-hour pilot. That's Toby Hooper. Just to give a little context here, I was friends with Toby because we were working on an independent movie, developing it a couple years prior. And when we were looking for directors for the Dark Skies pilot, we hit on Toby and everyone got excited about Toby. Of course, Toby had done, Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Poltergeist, where he worked with Steven Spielberg. And apparently he and Steven were very good friends. So here's a very interesting story that goes back to when we were scouting locations for the Dark Skies pilot. We were up in the Newhall Ranch area, which is north of Los Angeles up in the hills. And we were looking for an area where we could shoot our crop circle sequence. We had in the Dark Skies pilot, there's a big crop circle, right? That is the main character finds and has a whole interesting experience with. And so at the end of the day, after we had scouted this whole area, the small production group went down to like kind of a roadhouse restaurant. And because I had previously been friends with Toby, I sat aside with him while everyone else was talking about logistics and whatnot. And he had told me before that he and Steven were really good friends, but they were very competitive, right? Especially when it came to film. And I had said to him over dinner, you're going to finally beat Steven in something. You're going to be the first one to put a crop circle on film, because despite everything Steven had done up until that point, he had not done that. And Toby kind of chuckled and said, yeah, but I'll never be ahead of Steven in this category. And I was like, why? What do you mean? He goes, well, he knows a lot. He knows way more than me. And I said, oh, really? How so? He said, well, yeah, I guess like sometime after Jaws or something, because Jaws was such a big hit, he was approached by some people from the military or the government or something, and they offered him some sort of deal. Now, to put this in full context, this was before the pilot had been shot. It was certainly before the pilot had aired, which means this is way before the premiere party when people came to you and I and said, we want to make you a deal. So I'm hearing about a deal before it's even happened to us. At any rate, this was what Toby said. He didn't make a big, sorry for the pun, he didn't make a big deal out of it. It was just a conversational thing. I questioned him about it a little bit, and he kind of moved on, and that was that. Now, unfortunately, Toby has passed away, so we have no way to prove this, and I'm sure Steven Spielberg is not going to come on our podcast and talk about this.
But he's welcome to anytime. Yeah.
Yes, please come. We'd love to talk about your movies. We're huge fans. But I think now what we have to do is we have to ask the question, if this were true, and we're not saying it is, we're just saying there's anecdotal evidence, let's look at some other evidence, some circumstantial evidence that might imply maybe Steven and the people who made Close Encounters knew something, that may have been given some information. And let's start with Bryce, Project Serpo.
Oh boy, you want to start with Serpo?
Let's start with Serpo.
Well, you're going for the, okay.
Let's put the smoking gun on the table.
All right, we're going to follow up on all of that. We'll be back after a break. Well, okay. And I don't think we have to worry about spoilers. This movie's been out for almost 50 years now, so if you get spoiled on this one, tough luck. The film ends when Roy Neary, the Dreyfus character, goes to what is the Devil's Tower in Wyoming, which, by the way, is a real place. And Lou Elizondo even lives near there, which I find fascinating, but that's another episode, of course. But Dreyfus goes there. And the ending of the film is literally, there are 12 people who are ready to go onto this mothership and be taken to the home planet of these aliens in kind of a trade. And Dreyfus gets to go with them. He's the 13th man, if you will.
I think he's singled out as the only one that goes, if I remember correctly. Everyone else is left behind.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
You're telling me something I didn't understand. I've watched this.
That's my reading. I've seen it 30 times.
He's
the only one that walks on the ship. When we go inside the ship, it's him.
That's true, but I always saw there's a line of the conga line of 13 people in the red suits. I thought,
and all the little grays surround him, and they take him individually up onto the ship.
Wow.
Anyway, back to Project Serpo.
I'm trying to process this right now because I've just learned something totally new. Okay. Well. Okay, but there were 12 of them,
yes,
and they supposedly went off to another planet, or were supposed to, whether it was just Roy that went or not, and then one of the aliens stays here, which is exactly what supposedly happened in real life in 1965, according to the rumors. And again, they're rumors. There's no hard evidence I've ever seen that Project Serpo was real, but supposedly in 1965, we did send a dozen people someplace. They came back 13 years later, and they told about their life and adventures on this other planet. And what's interesting about it is it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. All right? Did this really happen? And then did people come to Spielberg and say, by the way, here's something you might want to consider for your ending. There's this real thing. Or is it the other way around, that Spielberg comes up with this thing about 12 people being ready to go off to another planet, and then later, because this didn't really make the public
until 2005.
Correct. So it's chicken and egg. Where do you come down on that, chicken or egg?
Well, hold on. I'm gonna withhold my chicken or egg vote for just a moment. Just looking at the evidence again, and I think this actually brings up some of what's so frustrating about ufology, right? Is because once you start looking at it kind of analytically, at some point you find yourself, you've stepped into the phenomenon, and everything, logic doesn't always hold up there. If you look at the chicken idea, then you say, okay, well, Spielberg was the one that planted this idea. Where did it come from? Well, as you said, there's only rumors about Project Serpo. They're pretty sophisticated and elaborate to the point where I believe hundreds, if not thousands of pages were leaked, right, that were part of some sort of defense agency classified documents or something. Obviously, those, like almost everything that comes out into the public sphere, have been highly contested and people have tried to debunk them and whatnot. So we don't have any verifiable evidence that Project Serpo happened. But if somebody was trying to reintroduce it into the public, why did they wait almost 30 years to do so? That seems odd. So no one knew about it in 77, seemingly. Is it a coincidence that Steven Spielberg puts this out there and then almost 30 years later, it seeps out into the public? Now, the other side of it, as you said, is, well, what if someone was just copying this? Okay, that's possible. But what a strange coincidence that it came out in 77 as this idea in a movie, and then suddenly it becomes this UFO touch point to the point where now there's a documentary that's coming out on Apple. That's the thing, is where does the truth end and the fiction begin? We don't know.
It's a lot. And if you think about it, in 2005, when they first started talking about Serpo, and by the way, this is a quagmire that we could be caught in forever talking Serpo's talk. But when they first came out with it, they said that they were taken to Zeta Reticuli, which if you're listening, you're saying Zeta Reticuli, that sounds familiar. The reason it sounds familiar is that's where Betty and Barney Hill, who were abducted in 1961, said that they were that the people who abducted them were from
the Zebans.
Yeah, they were Zeta Reticulans who took them and experimented on them and put them back. Now, what's interesting is, again, Serpo is supposed to have happened in 1965, okay? Betty and Barney's story didn't actually become public until 1966, as I recall, when the interrupted journey, well, it was late 65. So all this is going on at the same time. Now, I have to tell you, I don't know what to make of this. There is not a lick of hard evidence on the Project Serpo front. There's just a lot of people that talk about it.
Right.
And we're now two of them, apparently. But I will say, it's worth talking about whether Spielberg was approached or not, because what I will take to the bank over the Serpo story is your story about Toby Hooper. I remember when you told me that, and that took me back.
Right.
Because we all know Spielberg, and for someone who worked with him to say, oh yeah, they came and talked to him. So let's just step back for a minute and say, is it possible that Spielberg was approached? Well, first of all, look at his status. In 1974, I think Jaws comes out. It's a huge hit. And the very next thing he wants to do is Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And he takes over 2 years making it before it comes out in 77. Almost 3 years he's working on it. So there's plenty of time for people to realize he's working on it and to have approached him if they wanted to. We should point out, though, in the totality of this, Steven Spielberg has always denied ever being officially briefed. He's denied the mere act of it, let alone Serpo or anything else.
Yeah.
He has said repeatedly that he was simply fascinated by UFO reports. He had read from Hynek and Vallée, and he wanted to make a film about awe and contact. Mm-hmm. That's his official position. Now, not to get into name dropping or anything, but we both worked with the guy.
Yeah.
So I think we should at least talk about our impressions about what he knew and what he didn't know about UFOs. You want to go first?
Well, I think, yes, we both work with him, ironically, on UFO alien projects that were not dark skies.
Correct.
And were not close encounters. My experience was, somewhat less than yours, which is I was working at Electronic Arts on a game when he had a deal down the hall on a project codenamed LMNO, which was about a female alien who is on Earth, and kind of like the man who fell to Earth has interesting powers, and you're playing as this alien woman navigating, trying to escape the clutches of various government people who are trying to catch her and whatnot. And so my experiences sitting in the room with Steven, bouncing story ideas on occasion, was he has that childlike wonder, right, that he was looking to capture in Close Encounters. He asked a lot of questions. I didn't personally feel that he was any expert on the topic, but he certainly had a lot of interest and enthusiasm for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I met him 3 times, but only once in a hard UFO context. First time I met him was literally I got hired to write a video game called Ghost in the Machine for DreamWorks and had a meeting with him. This is when Dark Skies was on, though I will say this, as I was introduced to him at that time, he shook my hand and said, "Great to see you again." And this is the first time I ever met him. So I'm sure that's a line that he must have to use. And he said, "I'm a big fan of Dark Skies." And that was a surprise to me for reasons that we will go into in an episode further downstream.
Right.
But anyway, that happened. Then in 1999, I was hired to work on the Taken miniseries and was part of that original writer's room and was one of the 3 top producers on it. And we had, I think, 3 different there was no Zoom back then, right? So instead of a Zoom, he had somebody, he was in the Hamptons and he had a photographer there, and we had a photographer where we were out here in Hollywood. And the 3 of us had a meeting with Spielberg. And I'll come back to that in a second. The third time I met him I was chairman of the TV Academy, and they said, "Who do you want to sit with at the Emmys?" And this was the year that he and Hanks were nominated for Band of Brothers and won the Emmy. And I said, "I get to pick?" And they said, "Sure." And I went, "What about them?" So they sat me with them, and that was wonderful. Back to Taken, though. As people know, I think it's a 10-part miniseries that was on Sci-Fi, and it actually is very similar in some respects to Dark Skies, which preceded it by 3 years, I believe. And we had worked out a lot of things. The writer's room really knocked out all kinds of things about UFOs, and it was a pretty darn good story. And we were sort of, I think we had sent the paperwork to him, and then he was responding to it. All I'm going to say is this. He didn't sound like a guy that was briefed. He sounded like a guy, I wouldn't say childlike wonder. That's what the movie version of him was. I would just say he sounded like a guy of which I've talked to hundreds who is really into the UFO, UAP topic, wants to know what you know, knows enough about certain incidents that he wants to say, "What do you think about this? What about that?" And it was a pretty lively, interesting conversation all 3 times where he would... Yes, he had story points about the arc of everything, but he would also want to stop and talk about the UFO angle of something. It blew my mind. I felt really great that I got to be a part of that. And we could talk about that for a while. What I'd rather say, though, is people constantly do allege that he was briefed and that somehow he was asked to do things to help acclimate us to the alien contact issue, to make it easier for us to understand what's going on. Let's put that under a microscope for a second, because I'd love to believe it. It sounds interesting, and it happened to us, so why not? I mean, it could easily have happened. If they're coming to us, why go to Friedman and Zabel when you got Spielberg to go to? I mean, so yeah, I can definitely believe that. But if there's a message that was imparted to Spielberg, in which he was supposed to impart to the public, it's a very confused message. Think about this. Close Encounters. They're the Space Brothers. They're
benevolent
space brother aliens. E.T., cuddly scientists running around. Okay? War of the Worlds. Badass Martians marauding the countryside and killing people. Falling Skies. A full-on alien invasion. What's the message there?
Well, so this is a very interesting topic. I think, first of all, I have to personally ask myself, why would Toby lie to me? I'd been friends with him for years. He had a Southern charm to him. He grew up in Texas, obviously, and he was honest to a fault. And so the thought that he would lie to me seems strange. Now, then you could say, well, maybe Stephen lied to him. Maybe, but if he's gone on record as saying, I was never, why would he be telling a good friend a lie, right? So that part is, I'm stuck in that. The paradox of that. But let's go back to the other question you asked, which is, what's the message? Well, I think we have to look at time is not static. Time is constantly flowing. And let's go back to the 70s. What we had come out of in the 50s and 60s was a lot of movies where aliens were scary and hostile, right?
Certainly the 50s are Earth versus the flying saucers.
Yes, and even the day the Earth stood still,
right
like
on.
Big intelligence is coming down and telling humans how to live, and they were imposing and scary. They were not benevolent space brothers, right?
No.
So you could make the point that in the 70s, maybe the message from on high was, let's try and acclimate people to the idea that they don't have to be scared to watch the skies, right? That they're benevolent space brothers. Now, as we move into the 80s and 90s and beyond, maybe the messaging has changed. Maybe there's a bigger point here in, well, let's put out many different messages through Hollywood so that everything is out there and it's all confusing and people don't know what to believe, which is pretty much the state of the world we're in right now.
That pretty much explains where we are right this very second.
Yeah. So I think, again, we don't have the hard evidence to back any of this up. It's just we're looking at pieces of history and saying, isn't this interesting, right? So now, don't forget that when Steven Spielberg started to make the movie, he sought cooperation from two places, the Air Force and NASA. Right. Let's take a look at, do we have those quotes?
I do.
Yes.
It is fascinating because on one level, it just contextualizes what we're talking about. Obviously, if somebody did come to him, they came in a more covert way. This is the overt part of this story. First off, NASA. In 1978, he was talking in an interview, Spielberg himself, and he said that NASA wrote him a 20-page letter asking him not to make the film, which I thought was pretty fascinating. He had wanted cooperation, but they, as he put it, they read the script and got very angry and felt it was a film that would be dangerous. That's wild. But then this part actually humanizes it. He said, I think they mainly wrote the letter because Jaws convinced so many people around the world that there were sharks in toilets and bathtubs, not just in the oceans and rivers. They were afraid the same kind of epidemic would happen with UFOs, which in some respects did.
Right.
Because, I mean, Close Encounters, let me put it this way. I already knew about UFOs, and you did too when we saw it. It played on one level for that. But a whole lot of people just went to see what's this guy who just directed Jaws got up his sleeve, and they saw aliens, and they went, holy crap, what's this all about? Here's the one that I find more interesting because it pertains to you and me. He got a letter from, it was actually the National Guard Bureau in D.C., who wrote Columbia Pictures, but they were writing on behalf of the Air Force. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a direct quote from the letter written to Columbia Pictures. Quote, we have reviewed the script and believe it would be inappropriate for the Air Force to support the production. In 1969, the U.S. Air Force completed a study which concluded there is no evidence concerning the evidence of UFOs. That would be Project Blue Book, by the way. We have not been involved in UFOs since that study other than answering queries about the study. Here's the good part now. The proposed film leaves the distinct impression that UFOs, in fact, do exist. It also involves the government and military in a big cover-up of the existence of UFOs. These 2 points are counter to Air Force and Department of Defense policy and make support to the production inappropriate. Well, they're simply reacting to what Spielberg actually said he wanted to do.
Right.
He himself says, I was into UFOs, but then Watergate happened, and I thought, oh, that's my story, the government cover-up.
Right.
So they were saying, we don't buy it, but that's where it gets interesting to us, because this is the Air Force saying they don't want to help.
Yeah, so this is the last little piece of circumstantial evidence that ties everything back to Dark Skies and our friend JC. So going back to that deal we were offered, it was coming from ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence. And they claimed to us that the Air Force was actually against disclosure and that they, as the Office of Naval Intelligence, were the ones who were trying to get the truth out there, kind of using the veil of fiction to drip feed and condition the public over time. Well, what they were basically telling us was that there were two warring factions within the government, within the military-industrial complex, and they named them as the aviary and the aquarium. And so going back to this idea that the Air Force was telling Steven Spielberg, do not make this movie, well, that actually conforms quite nicely to what we were told by JC.
Absolutely true. And I will tell you, my street Nielsen's on telling the story about how the people who came to us from the Office of Naval Intelligence, and by the way, Dark Skies, just so you know, folks, the pilot itself said that the head of Majestic 12 in our pilot was a naval officer.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that the people who approached us said is, we think you got a lot of things right, one of which was you put the Navy in charge of the cover-up. So that's very interesting. When I've used the word aquarium to even UFO insiders, they do that polite, ha, 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 ha. But I'm telling you, that's what he said.
Yeah.
We didn't make this up. And it makes a certain amount of sense if you believe the aviary designation,
Right.
which was most famously brought out, I believe, in that 1988 documentary where they had the guy hidden in the shadows,
Yes.
and he talked about the aviary. So I don't know. All we can ever say in things like that is that's our experience. I will say I want to second what you said about Toby Hooper, though. Toby Hooper, you had already known him, but I got to know him as a human being and as a director and as a decent man. I had met him as recently as I think I was in Cannes a few years ago before he passed away, and got to hang out with him for a night. This is a decent guy.
Down to earth. Salt
Totally
of the earth,
down to
yeah.
earth. He is not the kind of guy that says, let me just float something. It's not true, but let me just float something to somebody and see if they buy it. There are people out there that do that. I mean, I'm a rehabilitated journalist. I know that. I've been lied to by professionals, is what I like to say. But I think I'm a pretty good judge of human nature, and I think you are too. Toby Hooper was a decent guy. I never heard him say anything but the truth to somebody as he understood it. And that applied to the set.
Yeah.
If somebody's performance was no good, he wouldn't sugarcoat it. He just we got it. We got to go again. We got to go again. That won't work.
Right.
I mean, and our lead, Eric Close, would confirm that as well, that Toby never spared his feelings or anybody's feelings, not in a bad way,
No.
just a supremely honest way. So I'm just going to underline 3 times that if Toby Hooper told you that, he wasn't blowing smoke. He believed that to be true. And since it's a personal story about him talking to Steven Spielberg, who he did know and worked for, I got to give it some credence.
Yeah. Well, I think the last thing before we wrap this up to think about, which I find particularly interesting, and it basically conforms with a lot of my experiences with the phenomenon as an experiencer, and that is this idea of the leap of faith. It's a key component of storytelling. You see it all the time. But I think look at what Roy Neary had to do to get the truth. He lost his job. He lost his family. He was willing to lose his life, right? There's that great scene in the helicopter when he's pushed as far as he can. He's been caught. He was so close to getting the truth. He's got a gas mask on because they've put up a whole fake quarantine to scare off the public. And he alone takes the gas mask off because he believes there's something else going on here, and he's willing to die to find the truth, right? That's a very powerful thing. And I think that's when the phenomenon recognizes you. When you're at that state and you're willing to put everything on the line and take risks, and there's something burning inside you, something happens to you at that time. I think we did it with Lowengaard. Lowengaard wanted the truth about what was going on. He sat and he talked with Betty and Barney Hill. He believed them. He was beaten up and abducted by Majestic 12. And when they said, if you want answers, you have to walk through the door and join us. Well, he had no idea that they wouldn't just kill him, right? And so he put everything on the line for the truth. And I think that is a hallmark of not just great UFO storytelling or great storytelling in general, but what it takes, the key that unlocks the phenomenon.
I don't want to leave the impression that whether Spielberg was approached or not approached reflects on him in any way, nor do I want to leave an impression that whether he listened to them or didn't listen to him reflects on him in any way. We didn't select ourselves. He probably wouldn't have selected himself. He seems like a very decent guy in my interactions on almost every level that I've interacted with
Same
him,
here. Same
personally. Here. So it's not out of the question. It's a good question. Not everything is equal. Project Serpo is not as well documented as other things. I would only leave us with this thought. In 1982, when he was debuting E.T. at the White House, Ronald Reagan, after the movie, said, there's only 2 people in this room that knows exactly how true this is. So that's an odd thing to say. Maybe it says more about Reagan than Spielberg, but there's no doubt that the number one person associated with UFOs and aliens in the film and television community, bar none, is Steven Spielberg. That's why we talk about him.
Yeah, so obviously very interesting that Ronald Reagan made this quote. This brings us all the way back to how Dark Skies was born with the story I was told by someone in the Reagan administration right around this time period.
Boy, we're just so full of teases. We got to get going on all this stuff. Anyway, we want to thank everybody for listening to us, because it's a conversation we're trying to have that we haven't heard too often. And, sometimes you write a movie or a book because you want to read it or see it and nobody else has done it. I think that's why we're doing this podcast. And so thanks all for paying attention.
Yes, thanks for listening, and watch the skies.
Watch the skies. Sound, Light, and Frequency is an iHeart podcast produced by Stellar Productions. It's executive produced by Nick Johnson, and for Stellar, Jackie Zabel. Our show's music was written by Anna Stumpf and Hamilton Lighthouser. And your hosts and executive producers are Bryce Zabel, that's me, and Brent Friedman. Watch the skies.